Hey there, Hello PhD listeners. As I record this, it's Halloween Day, October 31st, 2022. Dan and I thought it would be fun to share with you one of our favorite past episodes. For Halloween 2018, we reached out to listeners to share their lab horror stories, and they certainly came through. So, in honor of Halloween, we're sharing this episode with you again now. Keep in mind when we talk about meeting up at conferences and various travel in this episode that this was from 4 years ago. Happy Halloween and enjoy the show.
This episode of Hello PhD is sponsored by Promega and listeners like you. Thanks for your support.
Oh, did I tell you my lab horror story?
The whole thing.
I'm standing in the corner just crying, and my PI basically looked at me and was like, "Get a hold of yourself."
Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. This week, we're telling chilling tales of horror and desperation. Basically, it's just another week in grad school. Stay with us.
And we're back.
Excellent accent. Very well done.
This is Hello PhD, episode 103. I'm Joshua Hall.
And I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab.
And the inhuman side of science. Can you tell it's nearly Halloween?
It is nearly Halloween. We are recording this exactly 1 week from Halloween, right?
Yeah. You have your costume picked out?
I do. I'm going to be a chef.
Oh, nicely done.
Yep.
What do chefs look like precisely?
Well, I'm wearing a chef's hat.
Okay.
Yeah. My kids are food. They wanted to be food items this year, so my daughter will be a donut, and my son a hot dog, and our dog a taco.
I would like to know, in what restaurant can you find a chef who wears a chef's hat who makes donuts and hot dogs?
And tacos.
And tacos. Yeah.
So it's a new...
a fusion
A new
kind
fusion
of idea.
concept, yeah.
Yeah, I went to a school event and put on a captain's hat because I was already wearing a black coat and normal things that I wear every day. And you put on a captain's hat, you look like a captain.
You're a captain. Hey, I wanted a costume that just required putting on a hat. That was really my criteria.
Same here, yep.
Yeah. I think, Dan, you're coming over. We're going to do some trick-or-treating next week.
That is the plan.
And a bunch of kids.
How many?
A bunch.
Okay.
Don't worry, there will be wine.
Can I just drop the kids off and pick them up when you're done?
We'll just stay here and send the kids out.
You hand out candy.
Somebody's got to do it. Hey, Dan, speaking of tasty treats, we have a seasonal ethanol right here in front of us.
Part of our IPA free fall. This is not an IPA. What did you buy?
Okay, I feel like we have to do this at least once every fall, but I procured us a pumpkin beer.
Okay, which one is this?
Okay, so I have high hopes for this because this is from Rogue Brewing, and they know what they're doing. Rogue makes some good beers out of Oregon. This is the Rogue Pumpkin Patch Ale, and it says ale brewed with Rogue Farms pumpkins. So apparently Rogue also grows produce, their own produce they use in their beers.
Like you do. My first taste of this was just the foam at the top. It had a pretty good head on it.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was eating the whipped cream off of a pumpkin pie. That was the initial sensation that I had. It was very tasty.
Great.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing at all.
Well, let me tell you, Dan, this has 15 ingredients, okay? So it has Rogue Farms Dream Pumpkins, and then it has several malts.
Water.
Water. Well, I'm not going to name. Maybe all these malts count as ingredients. So I don't want to read those. But it also has orange peel, cinnamon, cloves, cardamom, vanilla, ginger, and nutmeg.
I think it's tasty.
Yeah, this is great.
This is not a traditional lager or ale that you just take to a party, but it's a tasty once a year thing, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I have to say, this might be my favorite pumpkin beer I've ever had.
I was about to think that, yes. I wasn't going to think it. I was about to think it.
You were fixing to think it. You remember last year, Dan, I had high hopes for a local beer that was brewed with actual whole pumpkin pies.
Yeah, they would just dump the entire pumpkin pie into the mash.
and we thought we had the wrong beer because
it didn't taste pumpkin-y.
No pumpkin taste. But this one, no doubt.
This is it. And you should be able to get this pretty much across the country, I would expect.
I got it at our local bottle shop. And so anywhere you can buy Rogue beers, I imagine you can find this one. It's in a big 750 ml bottle, though, so be ready for that.
And it's not too sweet, which I'm appreciative of. So go check this one out. I like it.
All right. Happy fall. Dan, I have been doing a ton of traveling lately.
Yeah, you are gone more than you're here, I think.
I know. It's been a little bit rough the last few weeks, but all fun things. So I was at the SACNAS conference.
Remind us what that means. That's an acronym that not everybody has heard.
Yeah, so SACNAS is an organization that's been around for a while. It's the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. And they have a big national meeting every year that I usually try to attend if I can. This one in San Antonio. So lots of undergrads, grad students, postdocs, faculty, other science type people who come together once a year.
I stalk you on Twitter, so I know you were there. So you posted some photos, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, one of the highlights was I got to very briefly meet one of the keynote speakers, Ellen Ochoa, who was the first Latina in space. She was an astronaut.
Amazing. That was exciting.
Yeah, it was super cool. But anyway, even more exciting than meeting an astronaut, I got to meet some Hello PhD listeners.
Oh, excellent. Who did you run into?
Yeah, so I just wanted to give a shout out to a few really cool folks that I met at the conference. I met Adrian, who's a grad student at Georgia Tech, and we had a long chat about grad school and also beer. He's quite a beer connoisseur, and we traded info on breweries to check out down in San Antonio. Also, Dan, I want to mention, have you been to San Antonio?
Never.
I've actually been 3 times in the last 2 years, but I ate tacos 5 meals in a row.
That is awesome.
Claim to fame.
I'm really jealous.
And they were good, too.
Were you skipping breakfast or you just had breakfast tacos?
Yeah,
perfect,
some breakfast
perfect.
tacos.
Yeah, some people don't eat breakfast. I don't know.
Yeah. So great to meet Adrian. Also, I met Kevin, and Kevin is a grad student at UPenn, and he and another colleague actually have started their own podcast called Caminos en Ciencia, and it is a podcast that highlights Latinos and Latinas within the scientific community. Really cool idea, and I told him I would plug that on our show.
Yeah, great for listeners of this podcast who want more podcasts, particularly about science. That sounds like a cool one.
Yeah. And then I also met our good friend Beth Bowman.
How's she doing?
She's doing great. Yeah, actually, we were going to catch up with Beth and do a little more recording about interviews, but she came down with the con crud, as I like to say. You go shake enough hands and you kind of get a cold or something.
Oh, yeah, caught a cold,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but great to see Beth. And then last, I got to meet Priscilla Rodriguez Garcia. And so this is really cool, Dan. I had tweeted that I was going to be at the conference, and she reached out saying she's a listener to the show and mentioned her poster number and when she was presenting. So I went over and checked out her poster, and she did a great job telling me about plant immunity. And it turns out her PI at Ohio State actually worked in my lab as a rotation student.
Oh, that's amazing. And when you first told me about this, I was really jealous because I wanted to learn about plant immunity. So hopefully you can relay everything you learned.
Well, I think we'll just let Priscilla can reach out. She
Okay,
can tell you all you want to know. But it's really cool. After the conference, she wrote a blog post about her experience at the conference and about how Twitter led us to meet. So
yeah, we have said it before. If you're not getting on Twitter before the conference starts, you're missing out on a really cool opportunity to catch up with people and to have a conversation pre-started before you get there.
Absolutely. So. And Priscilla, besides being a very cool person and a great scientist, she became a Patreon patron this week.
Oh, fantastic.
I must have been really nice to her.
You were probably very nice.
If you would like to support the show, you can become a patron as well. Just go to patreon.com/HelloPhD or click the Become a Patron button on our website, and we will give you access to our private Slack channel just for our Patreon patrons.
It's been blowing up this week.
Sure has.
We had a big discussion about our topic for today's show, so we got some inside information for that. Also, a pretty lengthy discussion about managing scientific papers and the software that people are using for that. So I've got some new feedback for a listener who wrote in asking for help on that.
Yeah.
So thank you to all our patrons for their help.
Good stuff.
Do you have any other conferences coming up that you're going to be attending? Maybe people will be there?
Yeah, I do. I have one more coming up in Indianapolis, the Abercams conference. So if anybody's going to be there in
tell me what that
Indianapolis,
means?
that is the annual biomedical research conference for minority students. And so I will be there. Abercams. I'll be there Indianapolis, middle of November. So if you're there or in Indianapolis, you know a good place to drink beer, let me know.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Josh, I want to let everybody know about an art contest that is sponsored by Promega for creative scientists. So Josh, scientists are creative people. I think by and large, they're doing other creative things. People are baking, people are drawing, people are doing photography. That was my shtick in grad school.
We used to play in a band.
You were in a band, that's right. So there are lots of artists in the scientific community. And so Promega wants to sponsor this art contest where you can submit an image, either digital art, photography, pictures from your research. So if you do microscopy or any kind of imaging, anything that you want, just submit that image by December 9th, and 5 winners will receive a prize pack and be featured in the Promega Art Showcase. They actually have an employee art showcase every year. So that starts in January 2019. And a grand prize winner will have the chance to actually go to Madison, Wisconsin, to the Promega headquarters to meet R&D scientists and attend the opening of the art show. So if you want to get your image submitted, go to promega.com/art contest to enter.
All right, Dan, well, why don't we jump into our topic and hear about some spooky lab stories?
I'm frightened.
All right, Dan. So with Halloween fast approaching here in the States, I guess Halloween, that's not an international holiday.
I sure don't know.
Well, we are celebrating Halloween soon, and it's quite the spooky holiday where we focus on the frightening. And so that's what we're going to do on today's episode. We put out a call on our social media and our Patreon for anyone who had any particularly frightening lab fail horror stories during grad school. And we got some good ones.
Yeah, these are fairly intense. So are you going to start with some of the tweets we got back?
Yeah. So I'll start with, here's just a few tweets we got. So the first one, this is from Inorganic Veggie on Twitter. I'm presuming not the real name.
Sprayed with pesticides.
Mm-hmm. And so Inorganic Veggie said, I had an advisor that didn't let me use my NIH grant supplements money for my experiments. I couldn't order reagents or send out plasmid DNA for sequencing. Of course, the project failed, and long story short, I ended up in another lab. Good thing I never saw ghosts in the lab.
Oh, that is so annoying.
Yeah, that's pretty...
It's really the story of a monster PI is what that is.
It's like, hey, I have this money to do research, but...
Give it to me.
Like, what are they going to do with it?
I have no idea. I mean, how much money do you think it could be?
I don't know. Who knows? And then we heard from Nancy, and what Nancy said, entire floor evacuation when a bottle of T-Med spilled, and the occasions when I let rodents out of the cage and couldn't get them back in more than once. I switched to cultured cells and C. elegans after that.
The worms don't crawl away quite as fast.
Yeah, Dan, have you ever used T-Med?
Yeah, and it does not smell good.
Yeah, no, I remember I used to... That was like the worst part about making those gels was that bottle. And you didn't add much, but it smelled, it almost was like a fishy smell.
Yeah, that and beta-mercaptoethanol are smells that I will never get out of my nose.
Oh, but could you imagine dropping a whole bottle of that stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, man. And then rodents out of the cage.
I don't think I've ever had it happen, but it was definitely a risk.
That definitely happened to me. That actually reminds me of my own horror story, Dan, that's related to that. So, in grad school, I worked on bacterial pathogens, and I spent a good deal of time in a BSL-3 or biosafety level 3 lab.
That's right. Yeah, these are serious pathogens. And so there were a lot of requirements, including wearing a full body, if you could imagine like a spacesuit, full body Tyvek suit. It's like in the movies when they have the face plate and the baggy.
I had all that, and the booties.
Yep.
And then I actually had, if you can imagine, a big belt that had these respirator packs that were battery powered, and then a giant tube that went from that into the back of my head.
Did you have batarangs on the belt? No.
No, that would have been cool. But anyway, Dan, one thing about these big motorized filter units was they had these organics filters, and so they would filter the air. They would filter not only any bacteria that happened to be floating through the air, which hopefully there were none, but also they would filter organics through. So the consequence was you never smelled anything. So any smells would actually be filtered out. So anyway, I'm sitting there. I'd finished my experiments. I'd put all of the hazardous waste into the autoclave, and the mouse cages were put away. And I'm sitting at the computer in the room doing some email. And suddenly, the autoclave is right there in the room. I thought, oh, those mouse cages really smell bad. And,
no.
And then suddenly it instantly occurred to me, wait a second. I shouldn't be able to smell those mouse cages. And I looked down and one of my filter units where I was sitting on the stool had physically popped off and I was just breathing air.
Whatever's
from
in the air.
room, Yep. So anyway, I very calmly.
So you lit a cigarette and just said, well, I've had a good run.
And watched the sunset across the ocean. So anyway, I very calmly, took off my safety suit. Walked back to the lab. So this was actually across camp. Walked back to my actual
Gargled
lab.
with bleach.
Told the PI what happened. And so anyway, I had to go to occupational health and safety. And basically they told me, they're like, well, the bacteria you study, while it can kill you, it is susceptible to antibiotics. So what we're going to do is just wait and see.
Nice.
See how you feel.
Meanwhile, you went home, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I went home, and I actually remember this very clearly. I was sitting home, and my wife got home from work, and as I'm sitting there, waiting for her, I started thinking like, I'm feeling a little warm. I feel like
the psychosomatics.
The sweats a little bit. So my wife came home and she's like, well, maybe we should take your temperature. I'm like, oh God. And so we took my temperature. It was like 97.5. And I was like, oh, I'm fine. And then I was okay. I lived.
But
for a moment.
I love the picture of you being like, wait, what is that smell? Wait, why is that smell? Yeah.
So yeah, I think we had to fill out an incident report with the CDC and my name's probably in a database somewhere.
I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Oh, did I tell you my lab horror story? My grad school horror story? I was going to say, let's start on day one.
The whole thing.
Just kidding.
We also heard from Robin Lee, who got a concussion from a graduated cylinder that fell off the drying rack. Said the science gods must have been trying to tell her something.
I like those drying racks. I mean, they're not very stable, but
those would be cool to have at home.
Yeah, if I didn't have a window right there, I think I would do it.
And then we heard from George, who said, for my master's, I was studying how spiders pay attention to their prey.
Okay, you can stop there. We're done with the story.
End of story. This gets worse, Dan. We had hundreds of mosquitoes in the lab, and sometimes they got out and flew around bugging us until we caught or squished them. One day this happened when a new student was in the lab. The mosquito picked her target. She swatted a couple times to no avail. So she got out her bug spray and sprayed it all around the lab. Everything and all of our experiments was compromised, and we were not happy people.
Wow.
I love that.
I like that there's a can of Raid sitting somewhere in the lab where you're trying to keep these animals alive.
Who carries bug spray around with them at all times? I don't know.
In undergrad, I worked in a plant cell biology lab, and we had the tissue culture room was full of these little soybean sprouts.
Oh, yeah.
I just imagine walking in with my Roundup and just spraying it everywhere. I'll take care of that for you guys. Don't worry about it.
Oh, my goodness. That's potent stuff. All right, Dan. So these were just a few of the tweets we got. But Dan also took some time to reach out and have a few grad students that are going to share their own spooky story in their own words.
I'm terrified. Let's hear it.
All right. The first story is from a grad student at the University of Alberta, Serena, and she didn't know her own strength, and this led to some issues in the lab.
So this was in undergraduate, or my bachelor's degree. I was doing my honors thesis project. So I had been in labs before, but kind of, organized course labs. So this was the first time I was kind of more independent. I was still working under a master's student, so I wasn't entirely alone. And what I was doing is I was filtering solvents and degassing them for an HPLC. So it's high performance liquid chromatography, chemistry background. And we used a water aspirator, so I had turned the water on, everything was fine, filtered, was degassing for about 20-30 minutes, and then I went to turn the water off. And this is the part that it happened really quickly, and it's sort of a blur. I'm a little bit shorter, so I had to be on my tiptoes a little bit and reach over to turn the faucet off. And what happened was the cold water tap, the entire is one of those screw left and right taps, not the fancier ones we have today. And it came off entirely in my hand. And when that happened, basically there was nothing stopping the water from coming out. So I had created a little fountain. I got soaked probably instantly, and I don't know how fast the water pressure was, but within about 5 minutes, there was about an inch of water on the ground. So I was, like I mentioned, new to the lab. So I looked around for a place for a water shut-off valve, but I didn't know where it was. So I was kind of checking a lot of the corners or cupboards. Sometimes the cupboards underneath the sink have that. So while I was running around, this was happening. About an inch or so of water had gathered on the floor. And then this was the second floor. So again, while I was trying to figure out how to shut the water off, about, maybe 2 or 3 puddles had started forming. on the first floor, and that was the first year labs. And it just so happened, I think I was very lucky. There was maybe like the location of the puzzles, I guess, were like strategic because they have like some expensive analytical balances in that lab, some other equipment. And it just so happened that none of the counter spaces or none of the tables were hit. It somehow fell directly in between the aisles. So I didn't damage any equipment downstairs, but of course, very quickly, people from downstairs rushed up once they saw, a little bit of rainfall in their labs. And that lab coordinator knew that the building was a little bit older, so it didn't have a water shutoff actually in the lab, which is what I was looking for. There was one kind of for the main hallway outside. So I think hopefully I would have eventually gotten there, but it was with her help that we turned the water off. I think it felt like forever, but was probably only about 5 minutes, maximum 10. I don't think it was that long. And then we brought in this, it basically looked like an industrial vacuum with a big hose at the end instead of one of those bristle vacuums. And we used that to vacuum up the water. And I don't remember if we actually calculated how much it was, but it was ridiculous. It was like 40 or 60 liters of water that had accumulated all over the floor and a little bit into the first floor. But that was, a little bit traumatizing as my first experience in the lab. We also had the maintenance come in and everything. They were joking that they don't know how I broke the faucet because I'm not really this big, strong person. And they thought it was just wear and tear, but it just so happened that I was the unlucky person who happened to be the one that touched it that day. Now I always look where everything is, water shut off, gas shut off, electrical shut off. And well, on the bright side, that lab has never been cleaner. Those floors are, or at least at the time, they were sparkling clean after our lab cleanup. But I was entirely soaked and very, very embarrassed because obviously everyone heard about it. I don't think anyone found out my name, but it was always like, oh, did you hear that, someone in the whatever lab on the second floor, there was a flood and it was an undergrad student. So that part had gotten out. And I remember people trying to figure out who it had been. Well, it was me.
Yeah, that was a mess.
It's not a great day in the lab, is it?
Yeah, I loved how she talked about how even though people didn't necessarily know her name, there was this lore of who was that student that flooded the lab that time.
I know we got a lot of stories this week from people who said, well, I heard about, such and such blowing up. And, it's sometimes part of the history of that department, but you didn't know the person who did it. She is one of those people now.
She's part of the lab lore, the departmental lore. All right, Dan, so the second story is from Lauren. And Lauren is another Canadian, a postdoc from Calgary, who has a shocking tale.
So this was from my PhD, and I was in Chicago, and I was pretty much in the home stretch of data collection. So I probably had maybe 5 participants left to run. And we had a long weekend. So I'm pretty certain it was Memorial Day or something. And we had these absolutely horrific storms over the weekend. And a lightning strike somehow fried our lab freezer. Fried it to the point where even the safeties didn't go off. And luckily, because, it was a long weekend, nobody was in lab on Monday. And come into the freezer area to a puddle that was about 12 feet around. So the entire freezer had thawed. So upon inspection, about 2/3 of my dissertation data had melted over the 3-day weekend. So that, in a nutshell, that's pretty much what happened. The other sort of icing on the cake was that because we had all sorts of fun samples in there, so human saliva, blood, et cetera, a fine layer of unidentifiable mold had also started growing. So I had to go through hazmat training to clean out the freezer. So not only was my dissertation data just destroyed, but I had to get some special fun training to clean out the destroyed freezer. But, luckily there is a happy ending to this. The silver lining was that I plowed through recollecting my dissertation data, and I still graduated about 6 months later. I had already proposed and everything was good to go. I was literally sort of sitting back and hoping to coast through the last few data points and start analyzing. But, the fates laughed at me and my confidence and gave me something else to do. I literally wept. The department head came in later that day to kind of see what had happened. And it turns out the circuitry that they had hooked the freezer up to wasn't quite correct. But as they're doing the inspection or whatever, I'm standing in the corner just crying. And my PI basically looked at me and was like, "Get a hold of yourself." Yeah, definitely a short story, but very, very scary.
Lightning, man.
Yeah, do we need a trigger warning for all these stories of blood and gore?
Yeah, don't you need those power strips, you put on your computer, the protective from running in? Man.
But a direct lightning strike is a totally different beast. This is not just a little surge on the grid. This is...
I'm just imagining what that might smell like, these thawed samples of blood and saliva and mold.
Put on your biohazard suit and you won't have to.
Well, I'm thankful that it all turned out okay. All right, Dan, so our last story we're going to hear, this one's a doozy. This is from Jessica, who is a postdoc at Princeton, and she's going to talk about her experience beyond lightning with a hurricane. So let's hear what she had to say.
So I was a graduate student at Rutgers University. I was in my second year of my PhD, and Hurricane Sandy was on the news, and everybody knew it was going to be a very large storm, and it had a possibility of hitting New Jersey. And we didn't have the best equipment when it came to electricity and keeping the power on and having generators and such. So during any storm, we had the possibility of losing power. We knew that. We were very well aware of that. We took precautions that I think a lot of people did not take, thinking that the storm was going to veer off and go into the ocean and not hit us directly. And a lot of places get hit by hurricanes, but I've lived in New Jersey my entire life, and I've never seen a storm like this. So this was quite a massive event. And so in 2012, we were setting up for the storm. We had moved samples already, just in preparation, shut down equipment that we knew was going to probably be affected from the storm, and we would lose power, and we didn't want that to happen. Now, there were red plugs on the wall that were supposed to be hooked up into a generator, so that was our preconceived notion. So, of course, we had prepped all the equipment that was plugged into those outlets, and we thought everything was good to go. The storm hit. Of course, all the power went out. Transformers blew up across the state. So midway through the hurricane, my roommate and I prepped lights and everything else that we might need, and we drove to campus. She had some animals on the farm, and so we checked on them first. Everything was okay. Horses can weather the storm pretty well. They were inside of a barn, so they were fine. But of course now her research had now been driven to a halt because there was no electricity, and she was performing some exercise-induced metabolism studies. But as many people had their research driven to a halt, this was not the main impact of the storm. So upon reaching our building, the power was out. But not only was the power out, but none of the generators were working. We later would find out that the generators were not actually plugged into the correct circuit, so nothing could be powered by those generators. So that meant the entire building was plunged into darkness, and it was also very dark out in the storm. So good thing we had our lights and such. And we had backup CO2 chambers for the -80, so that was something that I was very used to changing out, so I had that going. But of course, in the mid-darkness, and as events always happen, I dropped one of the washers. And thankfully, I found some extra ones, but that washer was never found until way after the storm was over. You never want to lose anything in pitch blackness. So we moved all the samples that we possibly could. But the other damage that was occurring as we were trying to save years and years of research was everything was melting. So not only was there a lot of rain outside that was coming in through the walls and such, but the freezers were melting. And so in the building that I was in, my lab had a nice coating of water on the floor. In the building next door, they were starting to leak, and they would eventually leak through the floors onto the labs below them. Security was a major issue. Some buildings couldn't get into. Some buildings were unlocked permanently because they had this new electronic fancy system that the default was to just be unlocked. Terrible. So it's not really funny because some of the labs actually did get ransacked by people in the area. But at the time, we were kind of joking like, wow, we have this really old building and we don't have that electronic system. So we actually had keys for everything, which was great because then we were able to lock things up and keep them secure. So in the midst of this hurricane, here we are, a couple of graduate students in their second year, moving samples and trying to save all our data. But not only that, but on top of all of the research issues that we had, and it took months for us to recover from, and we lost many, many reagents that the university actually were able to replace with at least funding so we could purchase the supplies again, even though some of them, we get them from other labs and such. They're custom made, so not everything was replaceable. But the poor students had nowhere to go, so their dorms also had lost power. So at the end of the day, we actually had some students staying with us because the only other alternative was to sleep in a gymnasium with no heat. So we had our students that were actually working in the lab staying with us. We didn't lose power in my apartment, thankfully. That was the one good thing. So we ended up taking some reagents and some samples that we absolutely could not use and putting them in our freezer at home because we had nowhere else to put them. And I was in a pretty new lab, so what we had lost wasn't too bad. But there was some specific labs, one freezer in particular that I remember that he lost 30 years of research in that freezer. He didn't have graduate students, he didn't have anybody to come help him, so he couldn't get to campus because the other thing that was happening at this whole time was there were a lot of downed trees. So not everybody could actually get there, and the cell phone service was very spotty. So it was very difficult to actually get in contact with people to see what you could help them with, even if you were on campus trying to make a difference and try to help. It was very difficult. And then, of course, because this was actually a pretty bad storm that impacted New Jersey, we couldn't get gasoline after a while. So our gas stations dried up. And that took a long time to recover from. So not only could people not get to their labs because of the downed trees and downed wires, but when they had to make sure that they had enough gas to get back. So this was actually probably a good month before we were even back up to running normal experiments and such. That some labs had water from all these freezers that melted that came through the ceilings and destroyed the lab. They took a lot longer. Our lab we were back up and running in a couple weeks, but once the power came on, we started everything up again, moved our samples back, so it was probably 3 weeks of delay in our lab. But pretty much every graduate student that was there during the time had a little asterisk in their thesis of this is when the storm hit because we lost power for quite a long time. I'm not going to lie, for a long time after that, every time I would hear a storm coming, we prepped probably a little bit more than we had to. It really keeps you up at night when you hear that wind lashing and you're like, just keeping your fingers crossed that you don't lose all your data in your last year of your PhD.
Man, as if grad school is not hard enough, getting hit by a hurricane. Oh my gosh.
You've got so much against you in grad school. You don't need Mother Nature on the other team.
Well, I liked how she said, a lot of the grad students who were there during that time all have a little asterisk in their dissertation about, and they also went through this hurricane.
You get an extra tassel on your mortarboard or what?
I don't know.
They should do, when you get hooded with the PhD, you should get merit badges.
You should get a special pin or something. It did make me think. I remember we used to put a lot of stock in those, in the lab, there were the regular outlets, and then there were the electrical outlets.
Oh, the red ones. They're magic.
The emergency ones that never go out. And
Not true.
Just think how bad that would be if all the freezers. I mean, really, the freezer is the thing, right? That's the safety archive, the safety valve of the lab, I guess.
Yeah, and what an unusual event for a hurricane to go that far up the East Coast. This is not a normal type of storm in the United States.
Yeah, you would never expect it. Dan, you got any horror stories? Anything that spooks you out about the lab?
Yeah, I think the thing that, there's a lot in the lab that is concerning and you should be concerned about. I mean, you shouldn't, all of the chemicals.
Yeah, there's dangerous stuff.
When you're working with radiation, all of that stuff. But none of it actually scared me so much as the ultracentrifuges.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
So I had heard the horror stories of, an ultracentrifuge getting unbalanced and exploding. And, it's apocryphal, but you hear these stories of pieces flew through the wall and nearly killed a person if he hadn't gone and got coffee, right?
Yeah.
So I took a look on the website of the American Industrial Hygiene Association, and they actually have photos and stories of centrifuges that have exploded.
Really?
So I would like to read you a harrowing tale.
I feel like it's a good thing you did not discover those websites when you were actually in the lab and
You're
seeing
so
these
right.
photos. You would have never been able to go in there. And it's like if you're afraid of flying and like you look at photos of plane crashes.
Yeah, no,
right?
totally.
It'd be totally
You're totally
awful.
correct.
Yeah.
So here's how the story starts. Milk samples were running in a Beckman L265B ultracentrifuge using a large aluminum rotor.
So this is an ultra centrifuge.
Yeah, it's
They're
one of the
super
big,
fast. Yeah,
looks
these
like a
are-
washing machine.
Yeah, those did freak me out. They were really fast.
The rotor had been used for this procedure many times before, approximately 1 hour into the operation. So it had worked for an hour,
Oh, so
right?
it had been balanced.
Yeah.
Oh, I just assumed if it's off balance, at the beginning, you'll know.
I should do this
right?
in a spookier voice. Approximately 1 hour into the operation, the rotor failed due to excessive...
Jimmy thought everything was fine, but it wasn't.
But then, the rotor failed due to excessive mechanical stress caused by the G forces of the high rotation speed. Here we go. The subsequent explosion, because at the speeds that these rotors are traveling, I mean,
yeah.
you talk about a bullet breaking the sound barrier. This is like whatever fragments come off. So the subsequent explosion completely destroyed the centrifuge, and there are pictures, which we will post. The safety shielding in the unit did not contain all the metal fragments. The half-inch thick sliding steel door on top of the unit buckled, allowing fragments, including the steel rotor top, to escape.
No, jeez.
Fragments ruined a nearby refrigerator and an ultra-cold freezer, in addition to making holes in the walls and ceiling. The unit itself was propelled sideways, damaged cabinets and shelving that contained over 100 containers of chemicals.
Oh, wow. I was just thinking, like, if you were, like, at your lab bench one floor up, right?
Oh, it would be like a bomb going off, for sure.
geez.
Fortunately, the sliding cabinet doors prevented the containers from falling to the floor and breaking. A shockwave from the accident shattered all 4 windows in the room. The shockwave also destroyed the control system for an incubator and shook an interior wall, causing shelving on the wall to collapse. Fortunately, the room was not occupied at the time, and there were no personal injuries.
It was like a bomb went off, really.
It was like a bomb went off, yeah. The cause of the accident is believed to be that the use of a model of rotor that was not approved by Beckman for the use in that centrifuge.
Or so Beckman claims.
Right? So be afraid. And so the pictures are terrifying. It's like twisted metal and things all over the floor. I always felt like standing in front of one of those as it came up to speed was a test of my faith in the machine. Have you used them, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So you push that button and you hear it go, like that low drone, like the...
Yeah.
And it keeps getting higher and higher, and you think it's never going to get higher than this. It just keeps going and going. And I stand there just to make sure it's not unbalanced. But I always felt like, walking a tightrope.
But then what would you do if it did start buckling around? I mean, you could just stand there.
I would stop it then,
Stop
right?
it and run out of the room, right?
But what this is describing is like in an instant, the thing is an explosion. So anyways, I have a healthy fear of ultracentrifuges.
What about those microfuges? Because, we have those all over I was never really afraid of those because they seem so small.
I'm so glad you asked. On the same website,
You're kidding.
story of a Fisher Micro 16 microfuge exploded. No one was hurt, thankfully. We'll get that out of the way. The outer shell of the centrifuge did not contain the explosion, and the fragments of the rotor sprayed all over the area. The entire front of the centrifuge was blown off. It passed from one bay in the lab to the adjacent bay, smashing bottles as it went. The front narrowly missed hitting a technician's head. Helmets.
I mean, I'm not surprised the casing didn't hold it in. I mean, they're plastic, right? I mean,
This is spooky. Another technician who had her back turned to the centrifuge felt fragments of the rotor spraying her back.
I think you're probably going to freak out. We have people listen to our show who are in labs with these on their lab bench every day.
That's
these
why I'm telling
microfuges.
these horrifying tales.
Oh my gosh.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
And Dan, I'll say the one piece of lab equipment that gave me a lot of fear and nervousness was you did tissue culture, right?
Sure did.
So, those giant CO2 canisters, they're like the size of a missile.
Yeah, maybe 5.5 feet tall or something.
Yeah, and they're so heavy. I mean, you can't pick them up. You have to kind of roll them.
You roll them, yeah.
And I just always thought, man, if I accidentally, if it fell over, if it's a little top heavy,
Yep.
what that would be like.
They are chained to the wall, hopefully.
They have the loosest chain, like one little
could
chain
slip out the bottom, yeah.
like that's going to do anything. But yeah, right. I don't know, for some reason switching those tanks out and getting that full tank and like rolling it over, I don't know, that made me
and
really
the danger
nervous.
is less from the tank falling on you and more if the gas should escape in the room, you'd be a goner.
It'd be a missile, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so there's probably pictures of that.
So enjoy your lab, everybody. Hope you have a good time.
Yeah, the worst thing I can get in my job now is carpal tunnel syndrome. So.
Right. Slowly but surely.
All right, Dan, this was quite a spooky episode.
Well, thank you for sharing this large bottle of Rogue Pumpkin Patch Ale.
Delicious. And I can say this is
kind of took the edge off of the scary, right?
Definitely. And this is the first pumpkin beer we have ever been able to recommend. So we recommend this Rogue Pumpkin Ale.
We've been at it for a while, too.
We have. But a special thanks to all of our contributors, whether it was stories or tweets. Thanks to them for sharing their stories with us.
And you can always share your stories, your lab horror stories with us. Find us on Twitter at HelloPhD, or you can email us, podcast@HelloPhD. We would love to do this again or to retweet your stories or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Dan, let's call a wrap on this show. As you said, Dan, if you have a spooky story or a question or topic idea, we'd love to hear it. As you mentioned, you can email us, podcast@HelloPhD.com, send us a tweet at HelloPhD, or you can leave us a message on our Facebook page. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We certainly love the feedback. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a patron. Simply go to our website, HelloPhD.com, click the Become a Patron button, or you can visit Patreon.com/HelloPhD, and we would love the pumpkin beer money.
And don't forget about the art contest, Promega.com/art contest if you want to enter.
Yep.
I'm going to put together something, I think. I've got some ideas.
Can we enter? That seems not right, not fair. Are we...
Guaranteed winner, Josh.
And the winner of the art contest, Dan Arneman, host of Hello PhD.
Smartaman.
But yeah, it'd be cool. You could win yourself a trip to Promega headquarters. It'd be great for the art show. All right, Dan. Well, I will see you for trick-or-treating next week, but we'll be back with our listeners at our next episode.
All right, we'll see you then.